Today's session, we will be discussing the methods of costing. Okay, as a part of today's session, we will be discussing the concept of methods of costing. Now, so far we have discussed what is cost, what is costing, cost accounting. We spoke about cost center, we spoke about cost unit, we spoke about classifications of cost. Now, when we discussed the definition of costing, cost accounting, I had told you that costing is the branch of accounting that deals with the study of cost and then methods to reduce cost. There's one more very important objective, or there's one very important function that cost accounting also has to play, which is that it helps you to determine the cost of your product. As a business, if you're rendering service, if you're manufacturing a product, it is very important for you to price your product perfectly, or you have to derive the appropriate price for your product. Now, when you're deriving the appropriate price for your product, it is important for you to calculate or consider all the possible costs that you have incurred. So you may have labor cost, you may have material cost, you may have supervision cost, you may have salary cost, you may have to pay commission. So all these are the various costs which are involved as a part of your manufacturing process or as a part of rendering your service to your client. But for you to price your product or service effectively, it is very important for you to calculate the cost. It is very important for you to estimate the cost. Okay. So for estimating or for calculating the cost, there are different approaches that you can adopt, okay, which is what we will be discussing as a part of methods of costing. So for you to calculate the cost, there are different approaches that you may follow, that you can adopt, and all that is what we will be discussing as a part of methods of costing. So in this slide, let us start. What is meant by methods of costing? Methods of costing refers to the processes employed in determining or ascertaining the cost. It refers to the methods, the process, the techniques, the methodologies that you are following in terms of determining the cost of your product or service. Now, there are different methods depending on the kind of product that you're dealing with, depending on the nature of your industry, depending on the need of the management. You could follow different methods of costing. So we would be discussing some of these important methods of costing as a part of today's session. So methods of costing refers to the techniques, the processes, the best practices, the approach, the methodologies that you can follow in terms of determining the cost of a product or service. So in that line, let's talk about the first method of costing. The first method of costing is what is called as job costing. The first method of costing that we would be discussing is job costing. What is meant by job costing? So here in your business or in your organization, you have various jobs. Now the jobs would vary from one job to another. So here what happens is you would calculate the cost associated with a specific job. You would try and correlate all the costs that you have incurred with respect to that, and then you would try and determine the total cost. So here what happens is for each activity, now in this case, in such organization, each activity or process would be referred to as a job. And this is used in organizations where every activity, every process is unique. When I touch upon the examples, you will understand this a little better. So here, for every job, the costs are identified, it is analyzed, and then it is accumulated, segregated, and then maintained separately. So when that is your approach, it is called as job costing. So let me touch upon this with an example. You walk into a service center with your vehicle, be it four-wheeler or be it two-wheeler. Okay. So immediately a representative would come close to you, and then he would pick up what is called as a job sheet or job card. and then he would write down the details. So he will take a physical check on your vehicle. He may take it out for a test drive, and then he would ask you details. He would ask you, sir, do you have any complaints right now? Is there any issues that you're facing right now, etc. So what is happening over there is that every job, every activity carried out on vehicle would be different from each other. Okay, so person A, person B, they both walk into the same service center with the same vehicle. But the job, the kind of activities which has to be done for person A is not the kind of activity which has to be done for person B. So it is unique, it is different. That's the reason why they would record all the details into what is called as a job card or a job sheet. Then once the activity is completed, the representative in the service center would total up all that for you and will give you the total cost. So this is what is meant by job costing. Job costing is used in businesses where they carry out activities which are very unique in nature. One activity is different from another activity. In such cases, all the costs related with that activity is accumulated and then analyzed, and then it is segregated and the total is determined. So this is what is meant by job costing. The best example that I could give you is the vehicle service at a service center. The next activity is called as, the next method of costing is called as batch costing. So here what would happen is the cost, here we do not have unique activity, we would carry out in the form of batches. Now what is meant by a batch? Batch would be a quantity of identical units. Okay? It would be a quantity of identical units of a product. Now, usually batch costing is applied in companies, in factories, in businesses where the production process is continuous. Okay? The production process is continuous. They would not wait for processing just one unit. They would process multiple units, and then what happens is the total cost which is associated with that particular set of units, which is referred to as a batch, is calculated, and then you go about for the computation. So the best example is what happens in the processed food industry. So for example, tinned or canned fish, So what happens is the company would get all the raw materials together. They would carry out it in a batch, and the batch may comprise of a few thousands of cans of canned fish, and then they would calculate what is their cost, and then they would end up determining the cost. So that is what is meant by batch costing. Okay. So batch costing, what happens is you would end up tracking the cost associated with a batch of product. A batch of product is a quantity. It is a unit of identical products, and then you would go about calculating the cost. So that is what is meant by batch costing. Next method of costing is called as process costing. Process costing, what happens over here is you would calculate the cost which is associated with a specific process. Now, what happens over here is, for your product to reach its final stage, it may have to go through multiple stages. It may have to go through multiple sequences. Okay? So here, you're trying to determine the activity associated with a specific process in getting the finished product. So here what happens over here is, for your product to reach its final condition, its final stage, it may have to go through a number of activities. It may have to go through a number of stages. You would end up determining the activity, you may end up determining the cost with a specific stage, with a specific activity. Such kinds of this thing is called as process costing. So what happens over here is you would determine the cost associated with a specific operation or with a stage of manufacture. Then you will determine the total cost, and then you will end up calculating the cost per unit. So for example, your mineral water industry, and you're trying to calculate the process of bottling of minerals. mineral water. Now, for you to get a bottle of mineral water, it may have to go through multiple, stages. So, for example, you have to, get the water. Then the water will have to go for sedimentation. Then the water will have to go for reverse osmosis. Then the water will have to go for treatment. Then the water will have to go for bottling. So here, what is happening is you are producing a group of products, okay, and then you're only analyzing what is the cost associated with a specific activity, with a specific stage. That is what is called as process costing. Now, at this point of time, you may have a big question in your mind: how is process costing different from batch costing? So in batch costing, what happens is the product may go through multiple stages. You're not at all interested in that. You just want to know what is the total cost of producing a batch of products. Okay? So it may go through step 1, step 2, step 3 for you to get the final product. But that is immaterial to you. That does not it does not really matter to you. So in such cases, this kind of costing, that is called as batch costing. But in process costing, what happens is, for you to get the final product, it may have to go through multiple stages, multiple sequences, and that is what is referred to as process costing. Okay? So you're trying to understand what is the cost that is associated with a specific activity, and that is called as process costing. So the example I've already given you, the example of bottling of mineral water. Next is operation costing. Now, operation costing, here what happens is, it is a combination of job costing as well as process costing. Okay? So what happens over here is that you are coming up with the same product, okay? But it so happens that at some point of time, at some stage, it may have to undergo a specific activity. So it is a combination of process costing because the product is almost the same, but at some stage, at some sequence, it may have to go for a slight differentiation. It may have to go for a slight. So I'll pick up on the example here at first so that you could understand this concept better. Okay? Now, let's pick up on a car. Okay? Let's pick up on a car like, let's say, Maruti Swift. Okay? Maruti Swift. Now, if you look at Maruti Swift, the dimension of the car is the same. Okay? The height, the length, the breadth, the frame, the chassis, etc. All this would be the same. Okay? But in Maruti Swift, you may have different variants: VXI, DXI, ZXI, LXI, etc. Okay? So the basic product is the same, but at some point of time, it is undergoing a differentiation. Okay? At some point of time, it is undergoing a differentiation. So because it is undergoing a differentiation, you have to use the combination of process costing as well as job costing. Okay? You have to use a combination of process costing as well as job costing. So this is what is meant by operation costing. So operation costing is a combination of job costing as well as process costing. Here what happens is you're dealing with identical products which at some point of time in your manufacturing process may need to undergo for a differentiation, as a result of which the prices you may have to determine it slightly different. So I picked up on the example of car. The car model may be the same, but it may have different variants. So the price of DXI of Maruti Swift may not be the price of LXI because there is a differentiation. There is a differentiation in the product. So this is what is meant by operation costing. So this is an example. This is a scenario where you will have to end up and applying the concept of operation costing. Okay. So another example, another classic example that I could give you. You walk into a hotel and you decide to order dosa. Okay. Now you have plain dosa and then you have masala dosa. Plain dosa and masala dosa, you would be using the same dosa batter. But at some point of time in your manufacturing process, it is undergoing a differentiation. Plain dosa, you don't have to add any masala, you don't have to apply that red chutney, you don't have to apply anything else. It does not need more cooking time. Okay, so you cannot end up pricing your plain dosa and masala dosa the same. In such cases, you would be applying operation costing. So operation costing is used where you're dealing with similar products which will undergo some form of differentiation, and to accommodate for that, you end up applying operation costing. Next is called as unit costing. Okay, so next is all called as the next method of costing that we would be dealing with is unit costing. It is also called as output costing or single output costing. Now, this is used in industries, in businesses where it's a large-scale production and the production activity is happening continuously. And also, the end product that you're coming up with, it is homogeneous in nature, which means it's the same, it is uniform. There is no difference at all. So here, what happens is, you will have to end up determining the cost per unit. You will have to end up determining the cost per unit. So the formula for in the case of unit costing, it is very simple. You calculate your total cost, you divide it by the number of units produced, you get the cost per unit. Okay, so it is used in industries, in businesses where the output is continuous in nature, the product is homogeneous in nature, and you go for a large scale production. So an example is your electricity cost. Okay, so BESCOM or whatever the ESCOM that you're taking the service from, they may end up calculating. They will end up charging you for the electricity that you're consuming based on kilowatt per hour. Okay, so they would be charging you based on kilowatt per hour. So for example, if you're in Bangalore, you will have to pay your electricity charges to BESCOM. So BESCOM will be calculating based on the number of units of electricity that you have consumed, which is in terms of kilowatts per hour. So how does BESCOM arrive at that conclusion? They have calculated the total cost. What is the cost of generating electricity? What is the cost of distributing electricity? What is the cost of transmitting that electricity? Then they will have to calculate. There may be any maintenance that may be needed. They may have to lay the electrical poles. They may have to lay out the wires. In certain cases, what happens is they may have to take the electricity connection underground. So there are various factors which are involved. There is an operation cost. Every month they will have to send out someone to your home to take the readings. So all these are the various costs which are associated with it. They will end up calculating the cost divided by the number of units which has been calculated or computed, and then they would end up charging. So this is what is meant by unit costing. Next cost is called as operating costing. Next method of costing is called as operating costing. Now, this is used especially by businesses which provide service. Okay? So here we are not talking about companies, we are not talking about businesses which provide physical services. They do not have a physical, they do not have a tangible product in place. They would be rendering some kind of service. So in such cases, how do they end up pricing their services? They would end up pricing their service by estimating the total cost which is associated, which is involved, which is associated, and then they would end up calculating the cost. Okay? So they would end up calculating the cost. So what basically is happening over here is the company, the business is calculating the total cost of rendering a service to you as a customer or a client. What the company is doing here is they are estimating the total cost involved in rendering a service to you. So let me give you an example. Stay at a hotel. When you stay at a hotel, it is a culmination of multiple services. Okay, when you stay at a hotel, it will be a culmination of multiple services. There should be someone at the front desk. The moment you walk into the hotel, there should be someone to greet you, smile at you, take down your details, complete your registration process, etc. Okay? So there would be front office service which is involved. Okay? Then the moment you walk into the room, someone should be there, to make sure that your bed is spread out very well. It is cleaned, it is wiped, it is mopped. The bathrooms are clean, fresh bedspreads are spread out, all that. So all your housekeeping. Okay? Then probably, they may, in certain cases when you stay at hotel, what happens is they would say breakfast complimentary. Okay? So which means they have to provide you food. Okay? So what happens is your stay at the hotel, it is the culmination of multiple services. There are multiple segments which are involved. So in such cases, the hotel company, what they would do is they would end up determining the price of the service depending on the sum total of all these sub-services. And then they would let you know. At this point of time, you may have a doubt, what is the difference between operation costing and operating costing? Okay? You may have a doubt about what is meant by operation costing and then what is meant by operating costing. The first difference is operation costing is used by companies which manufacture. Operating costing is used by service companies. Then next thing in operation costing is you're using a combination of process costing as well as job costing. Here what happens is you're adding up all the sub-services which are involved and then you're determining the cost. So we spoke about operating costing, and the best example that I could give you is staying at a hotel. Next method of costing is uniform costing. Okay, next method of costing is uniform costing. Uniform costing is used in industries, in companies which are, they belong to the same industry. Okay? So what will happen is, to determine their cost, they would end up applying the same accounting, same conventions, same practices, same concepts, same formats, same procedures, etc. Okay? So all the companies in that industry, they would end up sticking to a specific method of costing. Okay? They would end up sticking to a specific method of costing. So best example is hotel industry. Okay? So whether you walk into Vivanta Taj, or whether you walk into Oberoi, or whether you walk into let's say Ginger Hotel, or whether you walk into any hotel, as a matter of fact, all the hotels in the hotel industry, they would be applying operating costing. Okay? They will be applying the previous one, operating costing. So this is what is meant by uniform costing. So all the industries, all the companies in the similar industry, they would be following the same process. If they decide to follow the same process, it is called as uniform costing. Okay? It is called as uniform costing. Then you have the next method of costing that we would be discussing is multiple costing. Now, multiple costing, as the name suggests, it is a very complex method of costing. It is also known as composite costing. Now, this is used in industries, in businesses which depend on multiple parts. For them to get their finished product, they may need multiple components. Okay? They may need multiple components. Now, these because there are multiple components involved, it could so happen that you cannot stick to one method of costing. So you may have to apply multiple methods of costing. Okay? So this is especially used in companies which deal with complex products. So best example is your plane industry, your aircraft manufacturing. Okay? So if you think about the aircraft has got multiple parts. It has got the body, it has got the wings, it has got engines, it has got electronics, it has got wheels, it has got landing gear, it needs radar, etc. So what happens is, for multiple products, you may be following multiple methods of costing. So for example, for manufacturing the engine, you may be following job costing. For manufacturing your wings, you may be following batch costing. To manufacture the body, you may be following process costing. So as a result of which, if you have to determine the sum total of your finished products, you have to add up all this together and then determine the cost. Okay, you may have to determine the cost. So that is what is meant by multiple costing. So multiple costing is used in scenarios where the business would be dealing with complex products, complex services, and then you cannot depend on one single product. You may have to depend on multiple products, multiple methods of costing. That is what is called as multiple costing. Okay, so with that note, I've come to the end of today's session, today's class. And before I conclude, let me just quickly run you through the topics that we have discussed as a part of today's discussion. I will run you through an overview. We will have a quick recap of what we have done so far. So in today's session, we discussed the methods of costing. Methods of costing refers to the techniques, the processes which are employed in determining the cost. Now, depending on the kind of product that you're dealing with, depending on the nature of the industry, it could so happen that you may have to follow a different method of costing. The first method of costing is called as job costing. Here, every activity, every process is different from each other, as a result of which you would estimate, you would accumulate the total cost associated with a specific activity, add it up together, and then determine the total cost. Best example is vehicle service at a service center. Next is batch costing. So here in batch costing, what would happen is you would deal with a group of products, and then each group of products you will call it as a batch. You would determine the total cost which is associated in manufacturing a batch of products, and then you would end up determining the cost. Then you have process costing. Here, for you to get the finished product that you desire, your product may have to go through multiple stages, multiple steps, and then you are interested in knowing what is the cost associated with a specific step. That is called as process costing. Then you have operating costing. In operation costing, what happens is you're dealing with the same product, but it may involve some degree of differentiation. So you're using a combination of process costing as well as job costing to determine the cost. So I gave you the example of a model of car where you're dealing with different variants of that model. Unit costing, you're trying to estimate what is the cost associated with a specific unit of a product. This is used in industries which deal with homogeneous products, and the manufacturing process is continuous in nature. You would determine the total cost associated, and then you will calculate the cost per unit. This is called as unit costing. Example, the calculation of electricity cost. Then you have operating costing. Operating costing is used exclusively by businesses which deal with service, and sometimes it can so happen that the service, it may be a combination of sub-services. You are estimating the costs which are associated with all the sub-service, and then you're determining the price of your total service. Example, staying at a hotel. You may be needing front office, you may be needing room service, you may be needing housekeeping, etc. Uniform costing, this is used by businesses which are similar in nature. They belong to a specific industry, and what will happen is they would decide to stick to a specific practice of accounting, specific practice of determining the cost. So that is called as uniform costing. Example, hotel industry. Multiple costing, what happens over here is you may be dealing with a complex product which may involve very complex components, and you cannot afford to stick to one single type of product. You may have to use multiple methods of costing, and that is what is called as multiple costing. So example, plane manufacturing. For manufacturing a plane, you may need radar system, you need engine, you may need electronics, you may need wings, you may need body, you may need frame. So here, for different components, you may be applying different methods of costing, and to determine the total cost, you may be summing up it all together, and that is what is meant by multiple costing. So with that note, we have come to the end of today's session where we discussed the methods of costing. So thank you.